Now, state school graduates are still likely to earn thousands of pounds less than those who are privately educated. The educational charity, the Sutton Trust, says part of the problem is a lack of non-academic skills such as articulacy and assertiveness. Well, joining me now to discuss that, Dr. Frances Ryan, a journalist who specialises in inequality in education, and the author and journalist Harry Mount. And we should say that, Frances, you were state educated. Harry, you were privately educated. Frances, to you first. Are you surprised by these figures? Those who have been privately educated likely to earn £4,500 pounds more in the 3 years after graduation than those state educated.
I think it's difficult to be shocked when we see these sort of findings anymore. We know that they really are just confirming just how much of a class divide we still have in education and graduate level in this country. It's a bit embarrassing really that it's 2015 and Britain is still working in this way, that private education and on a wider level economic background has such a huge impact on whether we have access to certain jobs, and now we know whether we have certain salaries even. And as you say, we've got a sort of two-tier advantage working here. We know that there's less opportunity available for people from less privileged backgrounds to get the higher grades at school, to get access to the best universities. But we also know, and probably more worryingly, that there's this sort of less tangible inequality going on. Something as ingrained as the accent that we've got is used against certain applicants, and it's actually used as a way to pay them less than other just as capable graduates.
Harry Mount, what advantages do you think having a private education has had for you over your career?
Well, I think the first thing to say is the results of this survey are a statement of the screamingly obvious. I'm a great fan of the Sutton Trust who came up with these results, but they're not at all surprising. I mean, the first thing to say is that people from all over the world are sending their children to British private schools because they are among some of the best in the world. So it's not surprising that those schools that provide a better education produce better educated children. As I say, it's a statement of the screamingly obvious. What's worrying about this report is it shows that even bright children from state schools are earning less than not so bright children from private schools. And again, I don't think that's surprising, although very, very sad. And I think the thing is, private schools, as well as teaching you intellectually, also encourage a confidence, an ability to stand up to authority, and also an expectation of doing very well. So in a very spoilt way, I don't mind admitting I've been extremely privileged. When I left school, I wasn't just encouraged to go to Oxford, I was told which were the best colleges I should go to, given incredible inside information, as it were. And the same with careers. There's an expectation that you'd be a lawyer or a banker or a doctor or whatever it might be. So all these things are soft measures, as it were, which also end up increasing your earning power.
Frances Ryan, what can state schools do? Should state schools be trying to be more like private schools? Should they be doing different things? Should they be fostering perhaps greater competition? Should they be pushing their pupils further? Do you think that's the right thing to do?
I think we have to be really careful with presenting this idea that somehow by nature state schools are inferior and private schools are better. I think that level of prejudice is one element that leads to certain parents pushing their children towards private schools when actually there's just as much the quality state school education available to them and with a wider selection of peers. What we do have to do, I think, is look at not only the school system but the wider factors of inequality. It isn't just private schools that are leading to the fact that these sort of graduates are having such huge advantages. There are many complex, different elements of opportunities.
But isn't the point that Harry was making that he was pushed? He was told which colleges to apply for. It was about the culture of the private schools, and it may well be that the teaching in both schools is of a very similar level academically. But is it something about the culture of private schools, I wonder, Frances, that you think gives those pupils the advantage, and therefore do we perhaps need to look at the culture of state schools changing?
I think there's probably an element of knowledge. I know that at my state school there were amazing teachers. We had just as much as a You know, we need to squash that myth that somehow state school pupils don't want to try as hard, that state school teachers don't want to push their students in just the same way. I think there's less of a link, for example, with basic stuff like if your parents have gone to Oxford, it's much easier for you to know how to work that system. Something as basic as knowing what to say in the interview is such a huge advantage. And it's those, as Harry says, those really soft sort of cultural elements that give certain students such a huge advantage and really sort of lock other students out.
Harry, are employers missing a trick here? We know in terms of gender equality, for example, big firms that don't have women on their boards tend to do less well. Are employers missing out here? If they widened the net of who they employed, of who they encouraged, of who they promoted, of who they paid more, their companies might do better?
Actually, I think not. As I say, I'm a fan of the Sutton Trust, but where I think their report was wrong was suggesting that employers should do something to close the gap between the relative levels of education between private and state schools. And this is always the response. They try and fix the problem far too late. The answer is for those state schools to emulate private teaching methods. I mean, I was rigorously taught, but also ruthlessly sifted out, both in terms of getting into schools and setting once I was in schools, in terms of the top teachers who taught the top set. So private schools are ruthless in a way that the state sector isn't allowed to be. People talk about the terrible nature of the old 11 plus for grammar schools, where some people were discarded at 11. Well, that happens at the whole time in the private sector. They're very, very ruthless in sorting the sheep from the goats, and that's not so nice for the sheep. But at the same time, you've got to do it if you want to produce an elite, and I'm afraid it's an old cry, but it's the best one. If you reintroduce grammar schools on a massive level, which were often doing a lot better than not very good private schools in the 60s, then these figures would change. Somewhere like Oxbridge in the 60s.
They would change for some people. They would change for the brightest in state education. But what about the sheep? They need an education, they need a job, and they need a career.
Of course they do, but at the same time, there's been a levelling down in the state sector, and you will always get people who aren't going to do so well, and it's the same in the private sector as well. And you sacrifice the best in the state sector in order to produce, in order to pay respect to the great God of equality, or do you ensure that as many people in the state sector get as good an education and life chances and degrees and money as the rest of those in the private sector? It seems to me you've got to be cruel to be kind.
Dr. Francis, do you draw any hope from Ernst & Young this week have said that they're going to start introducing online testing for their graduate trainee scheme, and that they're not going to be asking what degree you got or what you got for your A-levels? They're going to be actually testing applicants in psychometric ways, and they've said that actually doing well at university, necessarily doing well at your A-levels, doesn't mean that you're going to be the kind of person they want to employ in years to come. I mean, does that give you any hope, or do you think this is an isolated case?
I think those sort of measures are really useful. I think if we are serious about the fact that we want this society to be a meritocracy, to have any hope of an equal opportunity, those sort of measures are things we need to look at, we need to expand. But I have to disagree incredibly strongly with this idea that what we have currently is in any way a true reflection of talent. It is not in any way that what we have at the top of our firms, whether it's law, the media, politics, is the best, is what is out there. That's the whole point of inequality in opportunity. It skews the talent pool. If we actually open up opportunity, we will manage to actually get this huge underused potential that is sitting there in less privileged families, communities, and actually our next Prime Minister, our next leading media, our next leading lawyers, whatever top profession you want to name, is sitting there. It is not necessarily sitting there in the next private school.
OK, and there we must leave it. Dr. Francis Ryan and Henry Mount, thank you both very much for joining us for the debate.